Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep,
Am I coming?
great.
Okay, just making sure. Yeah, I'm Chris Covert-Bowles. I'm a family doctor at Kaiser Northgate Clinic in Seattle. And as a family doctor, I treat children with asthma and adults with COPD and asthma. COPD is bronchitis and emphysema that are both caused and worsened by air pollution. Um, as a When my son was a baby, he actually struggled with asthma. And I remember one particularly scary day when out of town, we had to give him nebulizer treatments all day long at a little visitor center to try to stay out of the ER. And seeing your kids struggle to breathe is one of the scariest things, I think, for anyone. And I think no one should have to do that. And that's one of the things that made me a big fan of the Lung Association. So it's our responsibility to keep our children safe from air pollution, both when forest fires burn or all the smoke from the vehicles and the fracked gas burning in appliances indoors. All of those are huge impacts on people's health. Recently with the wildfire smoke, it's become even more obvious to so many people. So passing the clean fuel standard and changing the gas appliances and heating in homes and buildings from fracked gas to electricity are really critical ways to reduce all this suffering and death. Other speakers can address it, but we know gas stoves have 50% to over 400% more nitrogen dioxide in the indoor air than homes with electric stoves, which can worsen heart failure and asthma. Even those gases being vented outside worsens the outdoor air quality from the indoor gas burning. And people we know who live in zip codes closer to industrial zones and highways have much worse air quality and lung disease. 2 days ago, I saw a gentleman in his 80s who came in with a few weeks of shortness of breath and did all the tests, and it turns out he had huge blood clots in both lungs, and it turns out that blood clots in lungs are caused by wildfire smoke. Dug up a study about that that was recently published. So it's the obvious lung and even heart attacks and COPD, but even less so obvious things like blood clots. So again, we know this affects especially communities of color that are already more impacted, and that right now pollution from buildings causes a lot of the premature death, more than any other air sector generally. So if we can get rid of the gas burning inside, stoves, etc., heating, that'll make a huge impact. So that's why we're pushing the building electrification, and then the outdoor air quality with the clean fuel standard. That's already had a huge benefit in California and other states. So it's our time to step up and do that and protect our health for our kids and our adults. So that's my piece, and take it away, Nick.
Thank you, Chris. It's really great to have Chris here. I think we just mentioned in the chat, but it's worth reiterating that he's visiting us in between patients. He has a very busy day working with patients all day. So we appreciate you taking the time between your busy schedule to talk to us, Chris. Thank you. I wanted to quickly introduce WPSR as an organization, myself, and then maybe give a few ways that folks on this call could get more involved with us, and a little bit of background on some of the campaigns we're engaging in right now. Chris covered the basics, which is clean fuel standards for the 2021 session and building electrification across Washington. But before I go really into that, I'd like to just quickly say that WPSR is a 40-year-old physician-led advocacy organization. We are the Washington chapter of a national chain of PSR centers across the United States. And we really work to bring the voice of health professionals into advocacy spaces to include that perspective so that we can advance these campaigns in a really effective way. We feel like a lot of the times the health impacts of a lot of these environmental challenges aren't elevated in such a way that makes them really effective. And we think that voice is really valuable. So we really work to include and activate doctors, nurses, physicians in advocacy. Our website is WPSR.org, so I will put that on the slide later in case anybody wants a reference for that. But if you're curious to check us out, please do. We have 3 program areas. So I organize the climate program, which is one of 3 different areas. We also work on economic inequity and nuclear weapon abolition. So we have a lot, it's a pretty big mission, but we've been operating for a long time, and we really work to bring the health arguments to those spaces. If you have questions, you can visit our website, WPSR.org, and it gives you very clear instructions if you click on the program you're interested in to sign up for our weekly emails. I encourage everybody to do that if you're curious at all about what's going on or the ways in which health professionals are being mobilized across the state to support some of the really most important campaigns we have going on this year. And also, you're always welcome to reach out to either of us via email. That's our email on the left hand of the screen. But without further ado, I just want to bring some attention to a couple calls to action that we have today before moving on to our other fantastic speakers. So can I have the next slide, please? So really quick, just 3 things today that I wanted to bring up to everybody's attention. Like I said, we are the Washington chapter of a national chain of organizations, and we engage in a lot of different campaigns across the state. So there's always a bunch going on. The stuff that I'm bringing to you today, I tried to sort of zoom out and take a more statewide view of things going on so that we can be as widely applicable to everybody as possible. But that said, we have specific campaigns going on in a lot of the city centers in Washington, all along the Puget Sound. If you're interested, or if you would like to get involved or even learn about how you can use your voice to support our efforts, I really encourage you to check out some of those more specific campaigns or sign up for our weekly emails, and we'll keep you involved. But today, I'm just quickly going to talk about getting out the vote, writing to your elected officials about the Clean Fuel Standard ahead of the 2021 session, and then a bit more information about how to stay in touch with us. Next slide, please. So first, I don't think I need to explain to anybody on this call the state that we're in as a nation right now. This election is extremely pivotal for all of us in advocacy, no matter which side of the aisle you lay on. There's so much to say about this, and I feel like everybody's been so inundated, especially with the vice presidential debate yesterday and the shouting match that happened before that. And I mean, we all are very aware that we live in a time where multiple crises compound on each other, and it's really important for us to make our voices heard and make sure that we can do everything in our power to steer our country in the right direction. I really would like to encourage everybody. This is not even a WPSR specific campaign, but it's so important right now to please get out the vote. Go register if you're not, but more than that, encourage your friends and your peers and your colleagues. Make sure we can spread as far as we possibly can, because we're really finding ourselves at a crossroads in our political history as a nation, and what we do now will determine what we're able to do for the next 4 years and beyond. So the first thing is just a plea to you, please help us with this. Register as many people as you can. It's really, really important, especially this year. Next slide, please. So this is something I would like to draw to people's attention. This is a campaign we're working on with Climate Solutions and several other partners. The Clean Fuel Standards in Washington were introduced in 2019, passed the House and defeated in the Senate, but the momentum continues, and this is really a multi-year campaign. It's going to be on the ballot again this year, and we really think we have a good chance of pushing this across the finish line. So we'd really, really love folks' help writing to your elected officials in support of a clean fuel standard. We really think that this is the year that we can do this. It's sort of a low-hanging fruit as far as immediately reducing our carbon emissions, but also providing economic benefits to the state, putting us on the right path, and getting in line with the rest of the West Coast. We are the only state, British Columbia included, between Oregon, California, and British Columbia, that does not yet have a clean fuel standard, and we have mountains of data to suggest the numerous benefits that brings for communities, for jobs, for the environment. It's such an obvious thing that we can do, and something that we really, really need folks' help with right now is writing to your elected officials and laying some of that foundation so that when we head into session, we've done some of that groundwork, and it's not coming out of nowhere, but it's obvious and understood. The constituencies across the state recognize this as a really important first and immediate step that we have to take, and are activating themselves to the legislators to make sure that they know that as well. We'll share these slides with you after this presentation and this webinar, but if you click this link in this slide, it'll take you to a toolkit that we produced that will give you step-by-step instructions and background information, ways that you can reach your legislators. It's very simple. The ask here is just an email to your elected official, and there's more information about who is really important to activate and who isn't, but I encourage everybody in Washington, no matter which legislative district you live in, to please go to this guide and use it and help us elevate this issue to our legislators so that we can really push this across this year. It would be a really huge step forward as far as getting us on track to stay within our carbon budget and to help our communities as we recover from the pandemic. Next slide, please. And then lastly, I wanted to just put a plug in for getting involved with WPSR. Like I said, clean fuels and building electrification are going to be two major campaigns that we engage in that are happening statewide this year. But whereas clean fuels is on the ballot and something that we can all contribute to no matter where we live in Washington, the various tangential campaigns happening for building electrification are manifesting in different ways in various centers across the state. So mostly municipalities, for example, places like Bellingham, Seattle, and Olympia are very far in processes to pass things like ordinances at the city council that would eliminate the use of fracked gas in new buildings that are built in these areas. So engaging in those processes is really important for anybody that wants to learn more about how you can support local efforts in your area. These are not the only cities that are doing this. It's happening in lots of places across the state, but these three areas are those that are far along that really need support now that could actually probably have action by the end of the year. I didn't want to bog down this whole group with a bunch of very specific Washington actions because I know that we're more of a wider audience. But I would really please encourage you, if you live in Washington and you're interested in eliminating the use of fracked gas in our buildings and the health benefits associated with that, of which there are many, and I have some, Chris touched on it in a really good way. We also have a lot of studies to suggest just how devastating that is. And it really surprised me. I mean, it really is amazing the negative health consequences that are born from burning fracked gas indoors. I mean, there's some really scary numbers. So there's campaigns happening across the Puget Sound region to try and eliminate the use of fracked gas in new buildings. And I really encourage you to please reach out to me directly at my email or sign up on our website, WPSR.org, by clicking the climate tab and signing up for our weekly digest to learn how you can support those campaigns across the state and leading up the session and going forward. I mean, these are two really important pieces of our climate policy puzzle that we have to have in order to move forward as a state, getting on the right track. The clean fuels is such an easy, obvious way to immediately reduce our emissions, and the electric buildings contribute about 10% of our carbon portfolio in Washington and also are just astoundingly dangerous. So it's really important that we make sure that's obvious and that people are aware of that. And as an organization, we see it as our job to bring that argument to light and really push that so that people are really aware that they're exposing themselves to very serious risk by building new infrastructure using fracked gas instead of what is a relatively clean electrical grid that we have in Washington. It kind of presents a really strong opportunity for us to take advantage of the fact that our electricity is already so clean, to use that to our favor when we're building new buildings so that we're not exposing ourselves to new sources of fossil fuels. So that's all I really have. Those are the two campaigns that we're really working on across the state. Like I said, there's other things going on. WPSR works in various places in Washington to oppose large fossil fuel projects. I'm sure a lot of you are very aware of the fact that the Kalama facility just ended its comment period. So we work on things like LNG facilities, the methanol refinery in Kalama, and lots of different work in various other places across the sound. So I really encourage you all to learn more about it. Reach out to me. I'm always open and happy to take any questions. And we would love to get you involved as a health professional or not, in elevating some of the really serious health risks that we have in our state associated with the fossil fuel projects that we need to prevent. And that's all I got. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. And it's great to hear ways in which folks can get involved. Just want to, before we go to our next speaker, Will Barrett with American Lung, just want to remind folks, if you have a question, please use the Q&A function. It's a little bit easier for us to track to make sure that your question gets answered. So if you're looking at a Zoom if you're looking at the Zoom interface, there's a Q&A function down. It's just easier for us to make sure that we see your question, as there's a number of things happening in the chat. We've had a number of questions about building electrification and about indoor air quality. Just want to remind folks that Climate Solutions has in August, we did a presentation on building electrification, where we hosted some folks from Greater Boston, PSR, and others out front to talk about indoor air quality, as well as some local building contractors to talk about all electric buildings. And so there's some more information about that. You can watch the recording. I will include a link to the events where you can watch all the recordings and get slides from any of our series of Climate Leaders Live, which this is a part of. And so today's presentation is a part of. So want to make sure that Chris has time to get to his next patient. So I really appreciate you being with us in between, folks. It's always great to have you, and really always impressive around your dedication to both climate and health. And Nick will stay on. He'll be here to answer questions at the end. We'll be taking Q&A at the end. But thank you so much, Chris, for taking the time this morning.
Thanks. Have a good one. Bye.
All right, and with that, we are going to go to our next speaker, Will Barrett, who's the Director of Advocacy for Clean Air for the American Lung Association, coming to us from Sacramento, California, where the air quality is still bad. He said this morning, certainly not out of the woods, literally, I guess, for fires in California. But thanks, Will. I'm super happy to have you this morning.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. And I just want to note my colleague Carrie Nyson is on the line as well. She's in the chat. I saw her earlier, but she's our Director of Advocacy in the region, and certainly your local contact. Today, I'm going to talk about our Road to Clean Air report, which we released in September. The benefits of a national transition to electric vehicles over the coming decade. So we'll go to the next slide. And so here's just a very quick overview. We're really looking in this report at what are the potential health benefits and climate benefits of making this widespread transition to the electrification. And we looked at not only the passenger vehicle fleet, but also school buses, transit buses, all the way up through heavy duty trucking, and what it would look like if over the coming decades, we make a transition to 100% sales across these types of categories. I'll go to the next slide. So just as a baseline, the transportation sector is a dominant source of unhealthy air in the United States, certainly on the West Coast. And we also know that the transportation sector is the leading source of our climate pollution. So here you see, this is a slide from our State of the Air report. It's our annual report on air quality that we put out every April. And really just wanted to highlight the wide range of health impacts of ozone pollution and particle pollution, the two most widespread pollutants in the United States that we look at in our report. So you see here everything from minor irritation, wheezing, coughing, all the way up through asthma attacks, lung cancer, and even premature deaths. So there's serious health impacts due to air pollution, and the transportation sector is a leading source of that pollution. So that's really what prompted us to dive into our study. Next slide, please. And here, again, from our State of the Air report, before getting into the study itself, really wanted to highlight the fact that communities of color often face disproportionate exposures and burdens due to unhealthy air. And in our State of the Air report this year, we were able to include information on more demographic information, really highlighting the fact that our report, which issues grades on the county level based on ozone or summertime smog, as well as daily particle pollution and annual particle pollution. What we found is really striking. Across the country, communities of color, people of color are more likely to live in counties that experience unhealthy air and receive failing grades in our report. There's certainly striking numbers here, but really it comes down to people of color tend to live in counties, or are more likely, 1.5 times more likely to live in a county with a failing grade for one of the three pollution, and over 3 times more likely to live in a county where all 3 of the pollutants are graded as an F in our annual report. So again, really wanting to highlight the disparities here because they are so striking. And because we know we need solutions to the transportation crisis that benefit all communities, especially those most overburdened by transportation pollution. Our president and CEO, Harold Wimmer's quote here really highlights the urgency of our priority on transportation electrification and making sure that all communities benefit. Next slide, please. We're going to go through here some of the kind of nuts and bolts of the study that we just released. And really, this chart is showing the year in which we envisioned 100% sales on a national level for zero emission technologies. So in this decade, we're looking at school buses, transit buses, airport shuttles, making the transition to 100% sales by the end of this decade. For passenger vehicles on a national level, we're looking at 2040 for 100% sales, along with delivery vans, garbage trucks, and kind of short haul trucking. And then for the long haul truck sector, we've envisioned 100% sales by 2045. And that includes the long haul over the road trucks, but also trucks serving at the ports or drayage trucks. And that's certainly on the West Coast, a big concern. And the port trucking pollution creates significant environmental justice challenges and burdens that we know we need to be addressing as quickly as possible. There's a lot of effort underway to move for cleaner goods movement, and I think that's critically important. I think you'll hear a little bit more about diesel exhaust later in this panel. So basically, this is the structure of our report. We looked at the on-road pollution, we looked at the upstream emissions, so the power plants powering electric vehicles, but also the refineries and the upstream pollutants caused by liquid fuels as well. So it ties in nicely also with the Clean Fuel Standard work. Then using US EPA models for the pollution burdens, the upstream emissions from a US Energy Agency model, we combine that into the US EPA COBRA model that generates health benefits. And I'll walk through some of the results now in the next few slides. Next slide. So when we compared the electrification scenario to sort of a business as usual run of the US EPA's transportation model, this is what we came to. In a single year, we could generate $72 billion in public health benefits by transitioning the transportation sector across the board to electric vehicle technology. And what we found was that could save 6,000 lives per year, over 93,000 asthma attacks avoided, and significant numbers of lost workdays avoided due to respiratory health impacts, so over 415,000. Again, this is public health benefits in a single year due to cleaner air as we transition to zero emission technologies. Next slide. So here I've put together a slide really highlighting the fact that we have in our report not only the national level information, but state and some sub-regional or metropolitan area information. In the Pacific Northwest, you see the states here that I'm including in the region, over $2 billion in avoided health costs, almost 3,000 asthma attacks avoided, again, on a yearly basis. And we're able to translate the public health benefits into dollar values. And you see here in Washington, over almost $1.5 billion in annual benefits, nearly a little over 350 million in annual benefits in Oregon. And for the metropolitan areas, which cover multiple counties, not just the city boundaries, but Portland has 0.4 billion, and Seattle's around $1 billion in public health benefits on an annual basis through that transition to zero emission cars, buses, trucks, et cetera. So significant benefits locally in the region and nationally as well. So we'll go to the next slide. Just a quick slide here showing some of the areas around the country that had the largest benefits to gain through electrification. These are communities across the United States, certainly larger population base, larger local pollution burdens, that kind of thing, really driving this. But we have 14 US cities, including Seattle, that saw over $1 billion in public health benefits possible on an annual basis through the widespread transition to electric transportation. So just wanted to highlight that. This is contained in the report, and I think it's a very useful piece of information as far as local advocacy. Next slide. And then when we're looking at the climate change benefits, so the benefits of reduced carbon pollution in the transportation sector, we've topped over 113 billion in annual benefits. This is based on the metric, the social cost of carbon, that basically accounts for the benefits of a reduction in each ton of carbon through actions taken to combat climate change. We found over 1.5 billion metric tons reduced in our study in the year 2050, and as a kind of single year estimate. And that represents global climate benefits, things related to ecological services, clean water, clean air, reductions in health burdens, and other factors that play into our climate change burden. So again, the transportation sector is the leading source of carbon pollution in the United States, and certainly climate solutions have to come through the transportation sector. Next slide. In our report, we list out a handful of individual, state, local, and federal actions that can be taken. I won't go through them here, but we know that as states are moving forward with adopting the zero emission vehicle standards, we also need to see aggressive actions taken on the infrastructure needed to support the transition to zero emission vehicles. We also know that we need consumer programs and investments to be made so that all communities benefit. So really paying attention to equity in our policy designs, making sure that no community is left behind, and especially communities that have been overburdened by transportation pollution, whether passenger vehicle or port operations or major freeway sectors, or even the growing logistics and warehouse sectors, really needing to make sure that we're moving forward in an equitable way so that all communities benefit from clean air. So all of the more detailed recommendations are found in our report, and I'll go ahead and jump to the next slide. So here, just wanting to lay out some of the resources that we have on our website for the report, lung.org/EV. You see here a fact sheet that I think is very helpful in sharing with policymakers, the public, colleagues, really highlighting the local benefits of this transition that we envision in our report. We have the full report that we've put out, as well as the technical documentation prepared by our consultants at ICF. So those are available on our website. There's regional fact sheets for locations across the country. If you have colleagues working on similar issues, feel free to share those. And really, again, just wanted to make people aware of the resources available about our report. The next slide, please, I think is the last one. Right. We do have a petition on our website for the report that basically is calling on governors across the country to really make transportation electrification a major priority. We know that on the West Coast, the governors have taken strong actions. We know that there's more to do. We know that there's investments to be made, and really wanting to make sure that the governors are hearing from the public about the need to make electric transportation a priority within their overall efforts to clean up the transportation sector. This report is focused on electric vehicles, but we also know that the shift away from the need for driving for every trip, so investments in infrastructure for pedestrians, bikes, transit, all critically important, along with the clean fuels program that was mentioned earlier. So I think that if folks have questions, we'll take those at the end, but really appreciate the opportunity to share this project, and I'll put some links in the chat as we go forward so that you can see some of the other work that we're doing relating to clean transportation, but also a broader recognition that 2020, for all of the challenges, is also the 50th anniversary of the Clean Air Act, and all of the benefits that we've seen through the 5 decades of the Clean Air Act need to be preserved and protected and strengthened going forward to make sure that we continue to make progress and don't let climate change continue to interfere with cleaning up our air. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Will. I was really looking forward to you releasing this report, and I'm super glad we were able to provide a quick summary for folks today, and know that I'm also like personally in this strange place of potentially buying a new car, but sort of wanting to wait as well for an electric vehicle myself. So a lot of these developments are really exciting, and a lot of these projections are super awesome. All right, yes, we have a couple questions for Will. It sounds like you're going to post some links in the chat, and we're going to go to our next speaker, who's actually going to talk about an EV adoption and increasing access program that's happening in King County. It's super exciting. And so we're joined today by Angela Song with the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. And take it away, Angela.
Great, thank you so much. So good morning, everybody. My name's Angela, and today I'm going to talk about the electric car sharing project we have going on. Next slide, please. So the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, for those who are not familiar with us, we are a regional government agency that regulates the air quality for the 4 counties in the Seattle metropolitan area. So we do this by upholding the federal and state Clean Air Act, monitoring local air pollution, and running programs that reduce transportation emissions. And that last one is particularly important because here in the Puget Sound region, transportation is the #1 source of both climate and air pollution. Next slide, please. So we all know, or should know now, that electric vehicles significantly reduce air and climate pollution and can provide great cost savings. But there is unequal access to this technology for some communities, and particularly low-income communities and communities of color. During our research, we've seen 3 main barriers. First is the higher upfront cost. So right now, if you go and purchase an electric vehicle, it's going to be more expensive than a similar gas car. So it's going to be more difficult for many lower income families and individuals to purchase. The second barrier is access to vehicle charging infrastructure. Low-income communities and communities of color are more likely than others to live in multi-unit dwellings like apartments and condos, and it's actually really expensive to electrify these existing buildings with the charging infrastructure because it often requires upgrade to the building's electrical capacity. So currently there are very few multi-unit dwellings that actually have charging stations installed. So why is that? Why does that matter? It can be very difficult to own an electric vehicle if you don't have a very convenient way to fuel it. And last, it's clear that the general public still knows relatively little about electric vehicles, but low-income communities and communities of color are even less familiar with them. I've conducted several focus group sessions in our region on electric transportation, and oftentimes I'm the first person that has talked to these individuals about the technology. So people have a lot of misconceptions about how electric vehicles actually work. Next slide, please. All right, so one potential solution to bringing electric vehicle technology to low-income communities and communities of color is through car sharing. So what is car sharing? Simply put, it is a short-term car rental. Car shares have been shown to reduce vehicle purchases and lead to substantial transportation cost savings. So for instance, a study at the University of California, Berkeley concluded that each car sharing vehicle ultimately replaces 9 to 13 vehicles off the road. And the research also indicates that households can save up to $435 a month after joining a car share program. And these savings can benefit families that spend a disproportionate share of their income on transportation. Next slide, please. All right, so what does a car sharing program look like in one of our communities? So for the past 2 years, we have been working to start an electric car share in a Seattle neighborhood called South Park. This neighborhood is highly impacted by air pollution due to the major roadways and industry in the area. And South Park is also not well served by transit and heavily relies on personal vehicles for travel. And this community also embodies many of the barriers that I highlighted earlier. So recently, we conducted a study that evaluated opportunities for EV adoption in low-income communities, and we found that South Park was an ideal location for an electric car share program. And one of the key ingredients was a willing community partner called Vija Comunitaria, which has long-standing ties in the South Park neighborhood. In tandem with Vija, we are currently moving forward with launching an electric car share program. And the goal of this program is to provide the neighborhood with a clean transportation option while being able to learn about electric vehicles from a trusted source in the community. And in the end, our community partner, Vija, will own, operate, and maintain the electric car share, creating a long-lasting and self-sustaining benefit for the community. Next slide, please. So we just finished designing the program with our community partner, and we're currently working to launch it next summer, or this coming summer. So along the way, we learned a few things. So before launching any projects, it's really important to understand the community's specific transportation needs and barriers. So we've surveyed over 11 properties across the region to gain a better understanding of how residents traveled, and this really helped us figure out where an electric car share should go. Working with our community partner has been critical in developing this project. Without Vija's time, effort, and interest in this program, we wouldn't have been able to do any of this work. And you just can't, show up and start a program on your own. You really need that trusted partner that can bring the community's unique insights and perspective to the table. And one of my biggest takeaways has been the importance of education and outreach. Limited information is getting to these communities, and it's time to change that. Sharing information that's relatable and accessible will empower these communities. So during this project, we've been working with ECOS, the Environmental Coalition of South Seattle, to help share electric vehicle benefits in Spanish with the residents. And last, with COVID and the strains of that nonprofits face, it's important to be flexible and seek creative solutions. So we had originally planned a focus group session this summer, but had to change our plans once the pandemic hit, and our community participants didn't know how to use Zoom. So through an existing technology course that Vija offers, they taught their clients first how to use Zoom and its features, and those clients ended up becoming our focus group. So it's just an example of how we were trying to leverage existing resources to meet both of our goals. Next slide, please. With that, I'll wrap up. There's a lot more details to share about car sharing, so I'm happy to follow up with anyone who's interested. And thank you for having me this morning.
Thanks, Angela. I am super excited about the car share program, and yeah, South Park, for folks who aren't from Seattle or Washington or just not aware of where the neighborhood is, it's in a neighborhood that's been historically overburdened by air pollution. And so it's really great to see the benefits of that you heard Will talk about in terms of electrification and zero emission vehicles coming to a community that has historically not experience clean air. So, and we're also going to hear a little bit about that from Jamie, our next speaker with the Oregon Environmental Council, who's going to talk to us specifically about diesel particulate pollution and its impacts on our health. I definitely learned stuff about the Portland area that I didn't know just in preparation for this webinar. So super excited to hear from Jamie.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, my name's Jamie. I am with the Oregon Environmental Council, and I am the Environmental Health Program Director here. I work on issues ranging from air quality, air toxics, climate and health, and chemicals regulation. Stephanie, can you flip the slide, please? Thank you. So just a little bit about OEC. We are an environmental nonprofit, nonpartisan group that specializes in policy. And I am going to now go into the health effects of diesel, which is something that we work on here pretty heavily in Oregon. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is diesel? Diesel exhaust is a combination of gases and particulate matter produced during the incomplete combustion of diesel fuel. So the key here is incomplete combustion. If it is a complete combustion, there will be no exhaust. And diesel particles core is comprised mostly of black carbon. And what makes it toxic is that other toxic substances stick to it. And as a result, it can contain up to 40 hazardous substances, including fine particulate matter, also known as PM2.5, and toxic gases such as formaldehyde and benzene. Next slide, please. And so this presence of black carbon in diesel exhaust is what causes many of the negative health impacts and climate impacts. Diesel soot is small enough to get into the lungs, heart, and bloodstream. And black carbon is a potent climate contributor because it absorbs solar radiation and converts it to heat, thereby creating the short-term and local climate effects. And black carbon has a warming impact of up to 1,500 times stronger than carbon dioxide. And for example, it's been found up in the Himalayas, which is contributing to the glacial melt there. And so as a result, preventing black carbon emissions can reduce near-term climate warming and also prevent premature deaths. Next slide, please. So recent studies from the last 2 years show that health impacts of diesel pollution are worse than we initially thought. It's been known that diesel pollution causes many health ailments ranging from cancer, asthma attacks, respiratory illness, infertility in some cases. And air pollution in general significantly increases susceptibility to respiratory illnesses like COVID-19. But what you might not have known is that exposure to diesel pollution is now linked to hair loss, neurological diseases, and dementia. And a new 2020 study linked exposure to PM2.5, which is in diesel exhaust, to cardiac arrest. So specifically, there's up to a 4% increase of cardiac arrest with every increase in exposure to PM2.5. Next slide. And so what are the cost impacts of diesel pollution in Oregon? Despite its green reputation, Oregon actually does have a serious diesel pollution problem. And so Multnomah County, for example, which encompasses Portland, Oregon, ranks 4th in the nation for exposure to diesel exhaust. And diesel pollution in Oregon is over 10 times higher than the state's healthy air benchmark. This is quantitated in 460 premature deaths a year and over 25,000 lost work days. And this culminates to a $3.5 billion every year. So really improving health would yield a significant and measurable cost savings just for the economy. Next slide, please. In addition to the health costs, sort of already touched on by my colleagues, there is a disproportionate impact on frontline communities with diesel and air pollution as well, in terms of hotter temperatures and worst health impacts. So for example, a recent study from PSU found that East Portland is home to a number of urban heat islands, and that these heat islands average 13 degrees hotter than the wealthier, more tree-covered areas in West Portland. So the map here on the left, it shows the hotter temperatures in red, while the second map, which is an independent map, not from the same study, shows census data, and the dark purple represents the neighborhoods with more communities of color. And that is overlaid with the top 10 polluting industrial facilities that contribute to air pollution in Oregon. So put together, these maps show us that more communities of color and low-income communities live along urban heat islands and more pollution. In fact, so the PS2 study concluded that Portland is the most redlined city out of all 37 cities studied. And so this is where climate justice and environmental justice and a pandemic collide. Scientists at Harvard recently found that COVID-19 patients who live with more air pollution are more likely to die than those who live in cleaner areas. Next slide, please. So this then brings us to what we can do to clean up our air and health. Next slide. So at the end of the day, reducing diesel is what would be best for our climate and health. And one of the most significant ways to do so, which my colleagues have already mentioned, is to promote transportation electrification and zero emission vehicles. So California just set a new zero emission standard for trucks called the Clean Truck Rule. That would gradually increase the sale of medium and heavy duty trucks from 2024 to 2035. And this is something that other states can do. And this might be in the works here in Oregon as well. And utilities can invest in more charging infrastructure. We can support EVs more, and cities can also limit idling in areas such as parking lots and construction sites. And state agencies can also choose to regulate emissions from off-road vehicles based on specific sites, called the indirect source rules. And finally, the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality is currently trying to address diesel pollution through several rulemakings. One of them is House Bill 2007, which is the diesel retrofit requirement. It requires the phase out of dirty diesel engines in the Portland metro area. Business and truck owners can comply by upgrading their engine or switching their fuel or using retrofit technologies. This will also come with a grant program to help businesses upgrade. And this past March, we just updated our clean fuels program with the governor's executive order on climate. And that would transition Oregon towards a 25% reduction in pollution by 2035, making it the strongest clean fuels program in the nation. And the DEQ is in the process of developing this implementation. So the best way to stay informed is by signing up for email alerts from Climate Solutions, who has some great information about the program, and also from OEC. We will be updating members on the public commenting and advocacy opportunities as they come up with these rulemakings to push for stronger protections within the rules. Next slide. That's all I have. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions.
Thanks, Jamie. So we are super close to time, and it looks like a lot of our questions got answered in the chat. We did have a question if Will is still on. Oh, it looks like, Will, you answered that question to get information to policymakers regarding the EV report. So super quick, it looks like we don't actually have, if there are any other questions coming in. We just had a quick question for Jamie. Are commercial diesel trucks still allowed to idle overnight in truck parks in Oregon? Is that something that
Yeah, that's a good question. That is something I'm not exactly sure of. I do know that like idling is still an issue, and one way to correct it would be investment into shore power, which would apply to things like diesel trucks and boat docks and such, so that people don't have to run diesel engines in order to power things.
And then just a quick confirmation from you, Jamie, that Portland is the most redline cities of all the 37 studied, and it'd be great to include that link to the study you mentioned potentially in the chat for folks. I know there's been quite a bit on redlining in the national news lately as well. So
Yes, that is correct. It is part of a PST study that was done by Vivek Shandak, I believe. I'm not sure if I'm mispronouncing his name, and I will find that link and share it with folks. I know it was in a tiny little footnote in the presentation, so
that's okay.
I just have to pull it out.
We're gonna, and just for folks, a reminder, we share the recording and the slides after today, once the recording takes a couple of hours to post, and we can certainly follow up in our email with a link to that. I'm interested to see that as well. So super quick, thanks for joining us today, and thanks to all of our speakers, Jamie, Angela, Will, Chris, and Nick. It was really great to have you. We appreciate you spending the time in preparation and sharing a bit about your work and some of the challenges and solutions that we hope to see soon. Just super quick for folks, a couple of announcements on upcoming events. So Climate Leaders Live continues next month. We will be focused on a Washington legislative preview for 2021, and it should be a little bit different of a session, likely not in, or likely a lot of virtual updates from us there as well. So we'll be talking about transportation, definitely focused on transportation emissions in 2021 in Washington State. And we'll be talking a little bit about what we'll be working on and what we can anticipate is important for climate. There's also a PSR, Washington PSR has another event next week. That's on October 13th. And you can take the short URL there. You can also visit PSR's website to learn more about Washington State and local tax system dysfunction and reform. That's a part of their economic and inequity program there at PSR. And then our friends at Transportation Choices Coalition are also putting, this actually applies for both Washington and Oregon. There are a number of major transit measures in November coming up with the elections. And this will go over a number of them for both Washington, Oregon, and California. So if you're interested in that, all these links will be available to you in the slide deck, which we will hopefully have sometime tomorrow afternoon. All right, and thank you so much for joining us, folks. Again, we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come learn with us, and we'll see you next month.